question is, as well, like, obviously the TLC fan, it's a connection and the fact that, well, if that match was good, this match is going to be even better.
Yeah, that as well, you know, plus there's also the connection of past TLCs and stuff like that.
Yeah, totally. So the question is, where then does the Daffy Duck bump come? What's the follow-on from that? I'm not saying the follow-on's not going to be good, because there definitely is a place for it, 100%, but that's always using this guy as an analogy, right? Why you know, when you see a car crash on the motorway, why does the traffic in the other lane slow down?
Yeah.
Because people say they rubberneck and they want to see it. That, you know, you think, oh, the crash is on that side, how come? But that's the reason why. And I think that the problem is that, like, I'm not saying it's you know, those guys are awesome workers and it's going to be a tremendous match, but I still think that it, you know, like you're saying, it's not about it's about the connection. Yeah. And I think the connection, you can still have an awesome TLC match. The problem is what happens after that the guys take, like you said, with the guys not wrestle for a month, they're so banged up, or in an ideal world, that's how it, and I say in an ideal world, this is just my viewpoint, but you need to be able to, there has to be consequences to your actions, because the Daffy Duck bump, I think, is just around the corner. And I think I wanted to talk to you a little bit about wrestling Chinese whispers as well. Back to the punch, you know, it's something we were discussing earlier, but I feel where it goes wrong is that a lot of people have seen stuff that happened on television or that made sense at a certain point in time. Chris, you used the example, it might be worth saying the example you told me earlier about Guerrero-Malenko.
It was the 5 pinning combination where they'd start with a sunset flip and then they'd roll through and roll through and roll through. It'd be 5 pins and nothing would come of it. It would just be 5 near falls, which at the time and place of that one match,
because they were such matching each other.
They were great technical wrestlers. They were each other's equals, and they were known as like having a lot of matches. And it got to the point where they just were countering everything, and they got to this pinfall sequence, and the fans popped massively for this pinfall sequence because they'd never seen anything like this before, and it was believable, and it fit the match and the guys that were in it. But then people saw this and thought, well, that works, I'm going to take it and put it in my match. But
it's even got a name, the fish out of water spot. Yeah, what it's called. That's, you know.
But it's like everything in wrestling, time and place. You know, all the big moves, the big spots, big sequences. I mean, there's certain things that will fit in any wrestling match, but a lot of stuff is time and place. You can't take what works for Flash might not work for Alex. What works for Alex didn't work for Ric Flair or whatever. You know, everybody's different. Everybody has their own thing. And
well, so you got to look at your own character development.
Yeah.
You got to look at your own character, because again, you know, if I'm predominantly a brawler, you know, people are not going to expect me to be high fly. So when I do one high fly move, it's like, whoa, unexpected. Yeah. I always remember, you know, when I first came into the FWA around there, and I was absolutely getting slated on the internet for my matches. Oh, they're useless. I thought, well, if my character is a kick and punch heel, you don't want to see me doing high spots everywhere. So everyone said, oh, aren't you worried about the bad press? And I said, no, I'm loving it, because that's the reaction I want to get. You know, by them, sort of rubbish in my match or saying it was useless, all you did was this, well, that's what I wanted. So who wins?
Yeah, I think back to saying about the style of wrestling as well, like the high flyers. Something that's really fashionable with the high flyers now is the indie standoff. And the first time I saw an indie standoff wasn't in the indies; it was the Rock and Roll Express, who had been a tag team. You know, my favourite tag team growing up were the Rockers. So the Rock and Roll Express really the inspiration for the Rockers or the Midnight Rockers, and they did everything in unison and double hip tosses, double drop kicks. And so when they eventually in 1991 when they broke up, and they had the Robert Gibson v Richard Morton match because he joined the York Foundation, and I remember watching Great American Bash '91 Baltimore, and what happened was I think they lock up. It's hip toss, arm drag, drop kick, standoff, right? And the idea was, a commentator put over, man, these guys know each other so well, they can sense what the other one's going to do before they do it, right? So that was brilliant. It made sense. But then obviously people in that, 91 became wrestlers by 96, 97. Now in ECW, I'll tell you what worked. Do you remember we'll do an indie standoff? And then the generation that's on the UK scene now, that there are people that watch that as well, or people that watch the old FWA stuff. And now it's just travelled so that it's an indie, it's even got a name. It's an indie standoff, which is there's a place to do something like that. But the question is, it's logic. Back to the whole point of this discussion is logic in pro wrestling. And I think what happens is people don't ask the question, what is logical? It's what will look good. What will look good in our match?
What fits your match?
Like get me the best reaction.
People, and that's not a reaction is a response, but you need an emotional response.
But Alex, do you think this is a problem that's started? When did this start? I mean, if we were having this roundtable discussion in the 80s, would we have been talking about things in the 70s that had been done to death? I mean, when did it change that way, or has
definitely?
it always
Well,
been like that?
I think yeah. What I mean, you make it. That's a really valid point. Actually, it's one that I've not even thought, and I know that people, you can go as far back to the point where people will be saying, "Man, this bouncing off the ropes." This bouncing off the ropes. What? This going to kill wrestling, and a lot of people did believe that. The Irish whip was that was a move, and now it's a regular thing. I think what we need to get to is a point where you can't go back to it just being basic wrestling, because it's boring. But when I sat down at the first FWA show, and I was going to give a little speech to the boys, but because of the problems we had with the ring and the show starting late, the speech was like 7-8 minutes, even probably less than that. But I started by saying the FWA is a bubble, right? And I think everybody sort of, but the FWA is a bubble, and in this bubble there are certain rules that we have to stick to, right? Now I think pro wrestling, for example, were we talking about this before? Jeepers Creepers, right? The movie Jeepers Creepers, right? I'm not a big horror movie fan, but I watched Jeepers Creepers, and the first 20 minutes of that movie are 20 of the best minutes in a horror film that I've seen in a long time. It was gripping. I was wow, this is really, really good. And then all of a sudden, the guy who's the killer in the middle of the road sprouts huge wings and flies. Right now, at that point, that would be as logical to me as Doc Cotton disappearing in EastEnders and like time travelling, right? Because even though I know it's not real, within the confines of this reality, like the problem that WWE has now is they're telling their guys less character, more reality based, right? Now, I tell you what's happening. This is my take on it. Vince is in massive trouble from the UFC now, massive trouble, because it's important to look back at the history of what happened with wrestling, and it will take a couple of minutes, but people, you're saying where is this come from? So we have to look at why it's important now. British wrestling was an institution. It was an institution. It was huge. If you'd have said that it would disappear almost overnight, back in the 70s, people would have gone, no way. It was on television for 33 years, okay? When it ended overnight, it ended because the people running it didn't want to freshen it up.